Welcome, welcome. As you join us today, we wanted to invite you to introduce yourself to us, sorry. If you could put in the chat your role, your organization, and where you're calling in from, we'll be starting the webinar in just a few moments. Again, welcome to everybody who is logging on. Quite a few people showing up, which is great. We had a lot of registrations for this second event this morning. So we should have a good packed house. Welcome, welcome. We will wait about 1 more minute before we start. But we'd love to hear who is here. So if you could introduce yourself. Thank you, Hannah, for introducing yourself. Ikra, for introducing yourself. Please introduce your role, your organization, and where you're calling in from this morning so that we can get started. Got Denver, Colorado. Welcome to everyone. Again, as you join, please introduce yourself in the chat, your organization, hi Zimbabwe, your organization, where you're calling in from, and your role, if you could, your organization, where you're calling in from, and your role. So we know who's on the line. Welcome, welcome. So good morning, good afternoon, if that's appropriate, or good evening, depending on where you're calling in from. My name is Julie Kaler, and I'm the director for the GAYA activity. I am a white woman. I'm wearing a white collared shirt with white glasses, brown curly hair, and I'm sitting in my home office. I'd like to welcome you to this webinar where we will be sharing findings from our survey and our qualitative research concerning implementing partner strengths and areas for improvement on gender and youth integration. Many of you actually participated in this research with us. But the main point of today really is to hear from you. So that's throughout the day, we will be asking for your thoughts, your questions, your perspective around the findings and around the activities we're going to take to address those findings. We really want to hear whether these findings resonate or they need to be adjusted, and whether GAYA's work streams are aligned with your needs. Before we start, we'd like to inform you that this session will be recorded and that we are providing simultaneous interpretation in French, Spanish, and Arabic during today's session. I'd like to invite everybody to select their preferred language for this session. You can do this by clicking the interpretation icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. It should look like a little globe, and select your preferred language. You can choose to mute the original audio or listen at a lower volume if you would like. So also, you'll see that today's event is being presented using a platform called AHA Slides. There was a lot of engagement in AHA Slides at the earlier session, so let's try to make it even more engaged this time. So what you'll do is you will take a few seconds right now to join us on AHA Slides. You can do this by scanning the QR code that you see on the right-hand side of your screen using your smartphone, or click the link that's being put in the Zoom chat in your computer. Once you click the link or do the QR code, it's going to ask you for your email address. Once you put in the email address, the slides will come up, and it's going to allow you to really engage with us through questions, through reactions. At any point during this event, if you have questions or comments, please use the function called Ask a Question inside of AHA Slides. It'll be a white bar that says Ask a Question. Or use the emoticons to indicate your reactions to the different slides that are coming up. So each slide you'll be able to give a thumbs up, give a heart, give a surprised face once you do sign into AHA Slides. And again, that's scan the QR code with your smartphone or click the link in the Zoom chat or type in the link that's at the top of any of the slides today. And that'll get you right into AHA Slides. We do have team members from both the GAYA team and our research consulting firm, Sayara, who are tracking the questions as they come in and will be able to provide responses during our question and answer sessions. And we'll also be monitoring the Zoom chat in case you have trouble making AHA Slides work for you. You can put your questions in there and we can respond to you in the Zoom chat. So today's webinar is brought to you by the Gender and Youth Activity, or the GAYA team, which is a USAID Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance, a BHA-funded learning award, and it works to improve the quality and impact of food security activities by addressing the barriers and the challenges that implementing partners like yourself face when we try to integrate gender and youth activities within our work. GAYA is a 5-year award, and we are starting our 2nd year now. Our team sits across both Mercy Corps and Save the Children and is one of the Ideal Program Associate Awards. So we're connected to the Ideal Program. I'd like to now pass the floor to my colleague, Hope Shaken, who will talk to us a little bit about the purpose of the research and about the results.
Thanks,
Hope.
Julie. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Hope Shaken. I am the Technical Officer for Research and Learning on the GAYA program. I am a white woman in my early 30s wearing a blue long sleeve shirt, and I have brown curly hair. So as many of you are aware, GAYA undertook formative research earlier this year to better understand the needs and the strengths of implementing partners as related to gender and youth integration to inform GAYA's intervention design for the next 4 years. So to this end, we circulated a survey to implementing partners to measure your strengths and areas of improvement around knowledge, attitude, and practice related to gender and youth integration. Over 635 team members in humanitarian and development organizations from over 40 countries completed the survey. We then dug into the details with over 50 people in key informant interviews and focus group discussions to better understand the why and how behind the survey findings. About 50% of those who registered for this event today participated in either our survey or our qualitative research. So we're here today to discuss some of our findings with you and to hear your perspectives on what resonates and what needs to be further developed. We'll conclude by connecting some of these findings to GAYA's upcoming work streams and ask for your thoughts on the usefulness of our interventions. So, before we talk about the survey and the qualitative findings, please join us on AHA Slides if you haven't already. I can see from the bottom right-hand corner that about 23 of you have joined AHA Slides. We'd love to get your robust participation in today's session. As Julie said earlier, you can scan the QR code on the right side of your screen if you have a smartphone. Or if you'd like to join on your computer, my colleague Katie is trying to put a link into the chat now so that you can just click the link or you can type it in your browser window. So once you're joining AHA Slides, you'll see that there's an option to ask a question where you can use that button to ask a question at any time during the presentation. And we would love to see your reactions with the thumbs up or the love or the surprise emoji as we continue to present the findings from today. So do take a moment to join us on AHA Slides now if you haven't already. And if you're having any issues, let us know in the Zoom chat and we can try to help out. Or if you're not able to join AHA Slides for any reason, let us know and we can definitely continue to feed in your input through Zoom as well. Great. I see those numbers are steadily ticking up. So now that you've joined AHA Slides, I see 26 of you are now in there. We'd love to hear from you. What's one finding that you're expecting to see from the gender and youth integration data collection that GAYA did with implementing partners? So we talked a little bit about the purpose of the survey that we did with implementing partners, but we'd love to hear from you. What's one finding based on your context, your experience, that you're expecting to see in today's session? So if you've joined us on AHA Slides, you can type in your response to this question now. And if you haven't, just take a moment to join us on AHA Slides using that link that Katie provided. Senior leadership doesn't buy in is something that someone typed in, a potential finding that we're expecting to see today. Also, gaps in integrating gender and youth in humanitarian action, focusing specifically on the emergency side, potentially attitude barriers that we're facing in our work. The integration of gender and youth is tough. That is fair. It is a challenge. Additionally, challenges that we came across as partners tried to integrate gender and youth in their work. Any other findings that people are expecting around knowledge or attitude, barriers people are facing, potential practice barriers, or maybe strengths that you all think are going to show up in today's findings. Breaking generalizations about youth and gender inclusion, definitely. The impact of youth on the community and their role, awesome. Any other thoughts about potential findings that we expect to come through here? Staff capacities around youth integration, definitely. Yes, lack of meaningful youth engagement for sure. Actions that we can take to integrate gender and youth for sure. Organizations mainstreaming social inclusion. Okay, awesome. So we're definitely gonna, oh yeah, and here's one more, maybe differentials in gender-based skills and opportunities. We're definitely going to touch on a lot of these today. I think I'm already seeing some real connections to some of the findings that we're going to present. So this is absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing what your expectations are. So during our survey launch event in July of this year, which many of you attended, we told a story to illustrate why GAYA exists as a program. So we're going to use a version of this story to give some examples of findings from both the quantitative and qualitative data collection that we did. So I want you all to imagine you are a gender and youth lead on a program that is trying to improve household resilience in the face of shocks and stresses. So your program did a gender analysis and youth needs analysis during startup. As you can see from the survey findings, this actually is true for most respondents. 70% of respondents reported that gender analyses were conducted as a routine part of program planning, and 50% reported that youth analyses were conducted as a routine part of program planning. But because of timing considerations, the gender and youth analysis process you conducted in this as this imaginary gender and youth lead was not very participatory. As you can see from the findings, 19% of respondents had never participated in a gender analysis or assessment, and 33% had never participated in a youth analysis or assessment. So as a result, on this imaginary program, buy-in and ownership in gender and youth integration from technical experts, sector experts, and implementing staff was not strong from the startup phase. And while you as the gender and youth lead might see the importance of integrating the needs of different gender and age groups in your program's activities, it can be harder to convince busy sectoral leads to prioritize inclusive programming. So this came through in our qualitative findings, with one qualitative participant noting, technical experts don't feel responsible in implementing gender integration. They think responsibility is only with the gender experts. So without broad buy-in on gender and youth components, your imaginary team had a difficult time turning this analysis into an action plan with concrete activities. I see some emotions, some emoticon reactions coming into the chat. Feel free to continue to use those as we go through this story. So further, while your program design and action plan spoke to the importance of gender mainstreaming and youth-led approaches, the budget for these activities weren't defined, and so gender and youth inclusion was often deprioritized. So as you can see from the survey findings, 20% of respondents did not have a budget for gender activities, and 25% did not have a budget for youth activities. So as a result, that action plan that you spent a lot of time creating during program startup sat on the shelf and was half implemented or not implemented at all. We heard from one of you about this in our survey launch event, that we recently did a gender and inclusion assessment with recommendations and action plans, but the difficulty in implementing those actions was a lack of coordination and leadership. So we've seen this story play out time and time again. We know that these barriers and challenges can limit the ability of programs to achieve their outcomes and can limit the inclusivity of our programs themselves. So if this story resonates with you, feel free to share a heart or a thumbs up emoji. Or if any parts of this story surprised you, feel free to react with a surprised face. As always, you can use the Ask a Question feature to share your thoughts. And I would encourage you one more time, if you haven't joined us on AHA Slides, you can do so now. There's still that link at the top there, along with a QR code. I can see about 26 of us are in AHA Slides, and my colleague Katie is putting that link in the chat now, because we're gonna move to talking through some of the findings, and we'll use AHA Slides to ask for your questions in response to those findings so that we can do a bit of a question and answer. So please do join us now if you haven't already. So now I'd like to take you through what we think are the 5 most important findings from our recent quantitative and qualitative data collection. I'm going to quickly summarize the findings before we dig into each one in more detail. So the findings are: 1, we often focus on the mere participation of different gender and age groups, without examining whether this participation is meaningful or whether the program makes deliberate effort to address gender inequalities or barriers faced by young people. I saw some thumbs up come in response to that first finding. So the second finding is that the use of gender and youth data varies widely, with some teams continuing to focus on the basic disaggregated counting of participants and thus struggling to turn data into substantive program adaptation. Seeing more responses to that second finding, number 2. Number 3, internally held attitudes can get in the way of real change in our teams and in the communities in which we work. Again, lots of thumbs up to that one. Finding 4, internal practices and systems are not always pro-gender or pro-youth. And finding 5, internal and external tools and resources are not always accessible and utilized. So as we explore these findings in more detail, just to give you a little bit of a guide here, we're going to present the findings as they are in the survey, where quantitative findings will be presented as bullet points with percentages. Qualitative findings will be presented either as quotes in this blue-green or in purple callout boxes. At any time during the presentation of findings, feel free to send your hearts or your thumbs up or your surprise faces, or use the Ask a Question feature to share your thoughts and ask questions, because after we review each finding, we'll give you a chance to ask your questions about the finding. And feel free to put your questions in any language. We've got some folks on the line who can help us answer those questions, or we can respond to those questions after. So please feel free to put questions in a language that's most comfortable with you. Great, so let's dig in. The first finding from our survey and qualitative research is that we often focus on the mere participation of different gender and age groups without examining whether this participation is meaningful or whether the program addresses gender inequalities or barriers faced by young people. Lots of reactions to this finding. So we see that Persistent, restrictive, unequal attitudes and norms held by the communities, households, and individuals our programs reach are often getting in the way of meaningful participation. We saw from the survey results that a significant majority, 91%, agree that increasing women's participation in programs is difficult because of restrictive social attitudes. On the youth side, qualitative study participants noted that long-standing attitudes about the role of different age sets in society, as well as the involvement of youth in conflict, often limit youth integration. And participants from almost all regions also mentioned that the biggest challenge when it comes to gender and youth integration was related to contextual and social norms that influence the perception of gender roles. We also saw in our findings that even where respondents were including different gender and age groups as participants, that didn't necessarily mean that the needs and barriers of different groups were being fully integrated into programs. Seeing lots of reactions come in to this slide, participation is not integration. So in the survey, 17% of respondents did not think that their programs addressed gendered inequalities or did not address barriers to youth participation. This was echoed in qualitative research, which found that programs treat the inclusion of women and youth in activities as integration, rather than examining whether this participation is meaningful or whether programs address gender inequalities or barriers faced by young people. Great, I'm seeing lots of reactions come in. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Victoire Dumier, who's here representing GAYA International, to answer a question that's come in through the Ask a Question feature. GAYA International is a social enterprise specializing in rigorous research and communication to support positive change in fragile and conflict-affected societies. So questions that we don't get to in this first Q&A portion will be answered via the Zoom chat and will be shared via email with you after this event. So turning it over to you, Victoire.
Hi, everyone. So yes, so the question on the methodology. So let me come back quickly to the methodology that we use. So it was a 2 phases methodology. We started by a quantitative component with a self-reported CAP survey, meaning a survey focusing on knowledge, attitudes, and practices. And survey questions were categorized into models to address all the different themes. We targeted 635 people and in many different countries to kind of have a representative sampling of all the BHA funded IPs. Then we use qualitative methods to both validate and to enrich the survey findings and to answer the research questions that were not addressed. And we conducted both focal group discussion in different languages as well as key informant interviews. And combined, we reached a total of 53 participants in the qualitative engagement. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Victoire. So just as a reminder, if you haven't already joined us in AHA Slides, please do so using the QR code or link to add additional questions, and just flagging that any questions that we don't get to right at this moment, we might pick up in additional Q&A portions or in the Zoom as well. So I'm gonna, in the interest of time, I'm gonna move on to finding 2, and we'll pick up some of these really interesting questions here in a little bit. So finding 2, the second finding from our survey and qualitative research is that the use of gender and youth data varies widely, with some teams continuing to focus on the basic disaggregated counting of participants and struggling to turn data into substantive program adaptation. So we see this come through in the survey findings, with 31% reporting that program design and implementation were not informed by data on youth needs in the local context. 19% said the same about data on gender equality in the local context. Similarly, 29% of respondents said that programs did not identify how responsibilities and obligations related to age may affect people's capacity to participate in the program, with 21% reporting the same for gender roles. So we know that often when there is data collection and reflection on data involved in gender and youth integration, monitoring and evaluation teams often come in to support. But qualitative respondents in our data collection noted that monitoring and evaluation teams sometimes lack funding, expertise, and time to collect data on gender and youth integration, or to provide the program team with an informed decision on how to collect data on gender and youth integration or on gender and youth drawbacks and integration strategies. So moving from the design phase to the implementation phase, programs again can miss out on opportunities to measure or investigate meaningful participation or transformative change for different gender and age groups. This might be due to the fact that monitoring and evaluation tools do not collect data on youth participation and engagement. 24% reported this, or gender equality. 19% reported this. Further, 21% of respondents said that their program's M&E system or monitoring and evaluation system does not include gender-sensitive indicators. And 25% reported that the program team does not review the gender analysis during the project cycle and adjust activities. We know, however, that much of the data collection which digs into whether a program created transformative change is qualitative. However, our qualitative research found that staff do not have qualitative indicators to measure and track gender and youth impact. Our qualitative research also found that data on marginalized groups in the community, especially on disabled and LGBTQIA+ people, are also rarely available, with the effect that these groups are obscured from what we do know, and whether our programs are reaching the most marginalized and creating the changes that they most need. So things improve slightly in the evaluation phase, where only 14% reported that the impact of projects on gender is not evaluated. So I see we've had some questions come in. I'd like to turn it over to Victoire again to answer one of the questions. Just as a reminder, join us on AHA Slides, the links in the chat, the QR codes up there to use the Ask a Question feature. So over to you, Victoire.
Thanks, Hope. So regarding country-specific finding, let me go back a bit to the demographics of both the survey and the qualitative to give you a bit of insight. So regarding this for the survey, so out of the over 600 respondents that answered the survey, almost 3/4 of those respondents were based in Africa, with almost a quarter from Ethiopia, so around 150 respondents from Ethiopia. We got 15% of respondents based in Asia, 6% in Latin America countries, and 7% in the Middle East. The repartition for the qualitative was a bit similar, with 70% of staff also from Africa, and specifically focusing on 3 countries, which are Ethiopia, Uganda, and DRC. Over to you, Hope.
Thank you, Victoire. Great. I see some other questions have come in. As I said, we'll continue to respond to questions in the Zoom and also pick up some of these as we continue doing our Q&A, but do use the Ask a Question feature to ask a question at any time, and we'll try to address as many of them as we can. So I'm going to move now to the third finding. The third finding from our research is that internally held attitudes can get in the way of real change in our teams and in the communities in which they work. So we found that internal attitudinal barriers showed up across multiple different types of team members. I mentioned earlier that technical experts don't always feel responsible in implementing gender integration. To add to this, focus group discussion participants noted that technical experts do not have sufficient knowledge on gender and youth concepts and how gender and youth integration feeds into programming. This is a really important point, that not only is integration of gender and youth seen as the sole responsibility of gender and youth staff, but this is attributed to the lack of understanding among technical experts on how working on these concepts can improve water security or food security or agricultural outcomes, for example. So I'm seeing lots of reactions come into this finding. Maybe this resonates with a lot of you. So there was some indication that this problem that I was just speaking about could be something that stems from the management level. So only 58% of respondents indicated that management in their organizations always takes gender equality seriously, while 25% reported that management never or sometimes supports program teams to promote and integrate gender equality and youth inclusion. Seeing some reactions to this slide as well. Perhaps this is something that resonates with some of you. I know we had one person who anticipated that this would be a finding of our research. So this also came out on the qualitative side. Senior management does not make gender and youth integration a priority, as they, like technical sector leads, sometimes lack a clear understanding of the benefits. That said, senior management buy-in can be a big contributor to gender and youth integration success. When senior management prioritizes gender and youth, it becomes everyone's responsibility, and staff make time for it. So turning it over to Victoire once again to answer a question that's come in through the AHA Slides Ask a Question feature. Just another plug to join us there if you haven't already. Over to you, Victoire.
Thanks, Hope. Really quickly, I'm going to answer the first question on: did the team do any deep dives on specific projects to better understand the challenge in getting disaggregated and qualitative data? What we focus mainly regarding this is we disaggregated throughout the findings between RFSA programs and emergency programs to kind of like highlight the differences in finding in those two components. Otherwise, on the, if I have time, Hope, for the questions on the different gender groups, really quickly on that. We looked first of all at the response. We saw in the qualitative findings that there was some different feedback regarding female respondents that we also already noticed during the survey. For example, more female respondents agreed that gender lens makes work more effective, and also more female respondents agreed compared to male respondents that conducting a gender analysis improves programs' outcome. We also noticed some more 61% of men globally strongly agreeing that male and female are treated with equal respect, and this number was a bit lower with 51% respondents regarding for women considering that male and female are treated equally in the workplace.
Awesome, thank you, Victoire. I'll just read out this comment that's come in from one of you. Sometimes the organizational developments for the technical personnel comes rather too late in the program, making them feel dissociated. Definitely, this is a contributing factor that we saw come through. I'm going to pause the Q&A right there and try to pick up the other question that's come in the next time we pause. Keep your questions coming, keep your insights coming. This is all super valuable and helpful. So now we're going to move to the fourth finding, that even if staff are ready and willing to integrate gender and youth, internal practices and internal systems are not always pro-gender or pro-youth. So I spoke a little bit about how programs do not always have separate gender or youth budgets. So I won't touch on those findings again here. But on the staffing side, we also found that there was a shortage of gender and youth points of contact and a lack of mandate to work on gender and youth in overall position descriptions. So you can see from this graph that 26% of respondents did not have a youth point of contact at their organization, and 14% did not have a gender point of contact at their organization. I'm seeing some thumbs up here. Maybe some of you do not have a youth or gender point of contact at your organization. Further, 23% did not have youth integration as part of their position description, and 15% said the same for gender integration. Additionally, many respondents said that their project does not include enough staff focused on youth at 28%, and gender at 20%. We also heard some recommendations for having multiple technical officers trained on youth and gender integration, as they are the ones who actually implement the program activities. Again, a slide I'm seeing lots of reactions to. Finally, we heard from one of you at our survey launch event that internal systems and policies within different organizations at the consortium level are not pro-gender. This resonated in our survey as well, with nearly 40% lacking a youth participation policy and 20% lacking a gender equality or equity policy. So I notice we've got some questions coming in the chat, which is great, but I'm going to turn it over to Victoire to answer one of the questions that's come in, and we'll continue to respond to questions that we do not get to in the Zoom chat. So turning it over to you, Victoire.
So regarding what kind of staff indicators could be set up in programs to ensure the responsibility doesn't just fall on gender and youth experts. One interesting finding we saw in this research was that respondents mentioned that they do not have qualitative indicators to measure and track gender and youth integration. And they believed, most the experts that we talked with believe that those needs to be integrated across all activities, and it's not always the case. And some respondents mentioned that the indicators that they have usually are quantitative indicators that do not really demonstrate the result the project needs, and are not really able to measure cultural changes by value or figure. Therefore, maybe a recommendation based on this finding is for the needs for qualitative indicators that really measure changes in gender equality over time, and not just quantitative that count number of women and girls participating, to make sure that such indicators can really demonstrate the results of the cultural changes that's needed.
Wonderful. Thank you, Victoire. I might also just quickly speak to the second question here from the assessment findings. Are there projects that are doing well in either gender or youth programming, which we can learn from? One thing that came out really strongly in the qualitative side was not projects necessarily that are doing really well, but that approaches that are being used across projects, across programs, across organizations, or within individual programs or organizations that we can learn from, that might be useful as long as they're contextually adapted and contextually appropriate. And we'll get into what GAYA plans to do with some of the things that people spoke to around this a bit later on. So moving to the fifth finding, finally, we found that internal and external tools and resources are not always accessible and utilized. So 40% of survey respondents said they never or sometimes had access to tools to assist in youth integration. And 28% of respondents said the same for gender tools. Excuse me. This finding that youth resources were less likely to be accessible than gender resources held true too on the qualitative side. Some of the gender and youth experts that we talked to stated that they do not have resources for youth integration. So again, we find ourselves reacting to questions. I'm going to turn it over to Victoire to answer one more question before we ask for your inputs.
Thanks, Hope. So on the first question, between the link between internal organizational practices and gender and youth integration in the field, it's a good question. We actually did see that in the findings. For example, we had some staff who mentioned that it's really important for their staff to be role models on gender equality, because they cannot expect that the community to enhance something that the staff doesn't represent. So one way some programs do this, they created safe spaces for dialogue around gender issues. For example, they're bringing all the staff together to do a gender training, and then they're creating a space for staff to share their perspective on gender, so that the staff can learn from each other, and then they do the same process over again with the community to create this staff and community engagement and this exchange of practices. So
great. Thank you so much, Victoire. I just want to call out, this comment here: we find tools, but struggle to know really how to adapt them for our context. We're going to speak a little bit more about this later on. So with that, I'm going to move ahead to hearing from you about which of these findings resonate. So the question that we'd like you to answer today is, which of the findings that we just presented feels most relevant to you in your experience, in your daily work? The options are: 1, understanding of participation versus transformative change; 2, use of gender and youth data; 3, internally held attitudes; 4, practices and systems; and 5, access to tools and resources. So in the interest of getting the most meaningful results, we're going to ask that you only submit one option. And once you've answered your question, make sure you scroll down to the bottom of your screen and press submit so that your response shows up in this bar chart. You can see as responses come in, bar charts are being updated. So again, the question is, which finding feels most relevant to you in your daily work? Great, seeing some responses come in on Zoom as well. That's totally fine. So far we're seeing that, internally held attitudes is coming in really strongly. We'd love to hear from the rest of you. Which finding feels most relevant to you in your daily work? All right. Seeing internally held attitudes show up very strongly here. Also seeing a Zoom vote for finding 2 around use of gender and youth data, of finding 4 around practices and systems. Also seeing a lot around access to tools and resources. That's really good to know. All right, if you haven't already pressed submit, this is your last chance to submit your options. We see some coming in on the Zoom chat, which is great. I think the strongest showings that we have here are around, the salience of internally held attitudes, and then also the ability to access tools and resources, with the use of gender and youth data coming in third here. So thank you so much for your insights. We're going to ask you one more question before we dig into some of GAYA's intervention areas. So the next question is, okay, we know that this is a 1-hour presentation. There are definitely things missing from these findings, or things that need a little bit more context, a little bit more nuance. What would you add to these findings from your experience. Could be around knowledge or attitude or practice, different strengths or areas of improvement needed in gender and youth integration. Tell us a little bit what you think is missing from these findings. Go ahead and type it in on AHA Slides or in Zoom, and your responses will show up here once you press submit. So take a minute or two. What's missing from the findings we just presented? And I will ask Katie if it's possible to put on a little music while people think about, what's missing from these findings. What would you add? That would be great. Great, thank you so much. And do feel free to continue to put your responses to this question. What is missing from these findings? I'm going to read out a couple of these as they come in. So we're seeing practice from the donor. What is the donor role in integrating gender and youth? How different findings can be useful or relevant to a specific context or location or region. One of the things that we will be sharing out with you all after this event is global dashboards where you can sort of filter by country to contextualize some of the findings here, explaining how the sample size was set, the level at which internally held attitudes sit, whether senior management staff participated. That'll definitely be both in the summary report and in the final report, and we can get into that a little bit as well. Skills that are lacking among staff involved in gender and youth activities, making our work more accessible to folks. This is definitely an area that we could all improve. No one has the bandwidth to learn a new technical area, so how do we make gender and youth integration digestible? How different sectors within large programs are successful or not in their integration, which technical sectors like WASH, for example, might have a better track record. That's really, really interesting. Definitely the point on the donor role, seeing someone upvote that one, and then strategies relevant to enhance positive development of youth integration. Awesome. So a lot of these are going to come through in our final report. Thank you so much for contextualizing and adding your insights and feedback to these findings. We'll definitely, if any questions remain that we can't answer with the existing research, we'll definitely, we're a 5-year program, and so we'll have other opportunities to continue answering some of these questions and focusing on some of these points. So thank you so much for your insights and feedback. I'm going to pass it now to Julie to talk about how some of these findings inform our GAYA Year 2 work streams. So over to you, Julie.
Hi, everyone. I'm back. And I just wanted to share with you a couple of our work streams that we are engaging in for year 2. And we're hoping to get your feedback and your perspective on it. This is not the only thing GAYA will engage in, but these are major work streams that we're thinking about to address some of the findings that we're seeing come out of the survey, and actually to address some of the other questions that you guys have put in the chat. So let's see some of our planned activities. And again, these activities are intended to serve you all as the implementing partner community. And these next slides are really meant to solicit your feedback and get some perspective on if this addresses some of the needs you see and some of the gaps. So the first work stream I'd like to discuss is our plans for a Gender Resilience and Youth Fellowship, or Resilience, Gender and Youth Youth Fellowship. So in response to this finding around the need to address attitudinal barriers, especially amongst management and technical sector experts, GAYA intends to develop a fellowship, so time-bound, concrete, and problem-oriented for gender, youth, and technical sector leads and or management from BHA funded activities. So really targeting these partnerships that need to happen in programs in order to really bring the gender and youth expertise to life. So again, addressing this question around capacity for other tech leads, as well as partnerships around how can we problem solving, get the gender and youth data actioned inside these different technical sectors. So we are looking to feature both in-person and online components in this fellowship. And we want to support fellows to apply these core gender, youth, and resilience skills and frameworks, and practice evidence-based adaptations of program approaches. So really seeing it as a problem-solving space, very practical and not theoretical. This focus on this evidence-based adaptation comes directly out of the findings around better supporting teams to reflect on gender and youth data. So just again, connecting it back to our findings, where this is coming from. This is also coming from hearing from gender and youth leads around their wants for communities of practice, and really seeing that maybe a bit more traditional models of community of practice are really not what they're looking for. They're looking for something that is more aimed in this direction. So that's one of our work streams to highlight. A second work stream to highlight is that we recently convened implementing partners through 2 different webinars to support peer learning. And so we're hoping to convene more webinars to continue these 2 original conversations, but also to convene webinars to really look at what is working in this space, right? To really pull out, like you're saying in these questions, what are projects doing that we can learn from? So we really see this as part of GAYA's role to convene these conversations. So the 2 conversations that we convened so far, one was around commitments that we as a community want to make around gender and youth integration in the midst of the food crisis. And another one was around what are really the core competencies for all staff to better integrate gender and youth into their programming. So again, going back to this question that was asked around how can we ensure staff are prioritizing gender and youth in their roles, right? So we have started that conversation. We convened a webinar looking at the core competencies for all staff. And we'll continue that conversation through different modalities. So we were really excited about the engagement in these conversations and the co-creation that happened across organizations to really drive these conversations forward. So we're really looking as a team to take actions around these conversations and drive those conversations. So there's potential to publicize the results of these conversations, advertise and or amplify key resources and good practices, and different innovations by different implementing partners. So that's the second work stream, is really driving these conversations, amplifying resources, amplifying strategies, amplifying what is working, and having some of these hard problem solving conversations in our field. So the final work stream we wanted to highlight today directly connects to our finding about the need to improve access to tools and resources. And it's really around amplifying or adapting resources that are already in existence so that implementing partners can better use this. We saw a comment and a question in the chat really around, like, we know where resources are, but like that contextualization piece becomes a challenge. And I imagine this is even more of a challenge for our colleagues who are in emergencies, right? When you don't have the time to really sit and adapt, like you need resources to go to that have been adapted, or there's a map for you to adapt them. So the main focus of this work stream is not to create new materials, but to repackage, publicize, amplify, connect together proven tools and resources and different processes that people are using, with the recognition that tools are only part of the equation, that the process really matters, that the sequencing really matters. And so supporting with that. So we really hope through this work stream to scale up the adaptation of these resources in that gender and youth space, especially for the colleagues that are working in the emergency space, because we know that this is a space that those adaptations or access to quick tools and resources is just not as plentiful, especially around youth. So reflecting on these potential interventions, we'd like to get your perspective. We want to hear from you. Just based on these three, how useful do these interventions sound to you? Again, the interventions are a resilience, gender, and youth fellowship, right? Time-bound, problem-solving oriented with sectoral leads management and gender and youth leads. Online discussions that are really around driving what is working, what are some of the big challenges, and doing problem-solving conversations. So really driving dialogue. And the third being resource amplification. So supporting with adaptations, sequencing, weaving together of resources that do currently exist. So we'd love to hear from you on this scale that you see in AHA slides, from not useful to very useful, of these three interventions that we're highlighting right now. And please do ask a question in the comments feature, put a question in Zoom if you have questions about these individual work streams. You can find us and continue this conversation on the FSN website under GAYA, where in the next month we'll be posting these work streams so that you know really what GAYA has to offer and how you can engage with us. Oh, let's see what people are thinking. So I see there is a lot of value that's being seen in the fellowship model. We've got like peaks around some of these different interventions. Resource amplification seems to resonate with people. The online discussions seem solid. Maybe people are a bit more excited about the fellowship model. So again, you can continue to input into AHA slides and or put your perspectives on these three different work streams we're highlighting in the chat. And as you've noticed, we've been trying to answer the French questions in the chat as well. And we will be sending out responses to the questions that we haven't answered after the webinar. So we're getting really close to the end, and I want to thank everyone. We really value everyone's insights into GAYA's work streams and also the findings from the research. If you're interested in digging into the findings we presented today a bit more, we will be sharing a link to dashboards for this global survey, which you can filter and you can use to further explore. We'll share this in an email after the event. Those dashboards are amazing for having conversations within your organization, especially at a country level. You can filter that way. Also, our final survey report will be published along with a 2-pager translated into multiple different languages in January. So you can have the highlights of that report for your use for advocacy internally and whatever uses you see fit. We are almost at time, but before we let you go, we want to take a moment to quickly hear from you on how accessible this event was and how to improve that accessibility, as well as feedback on GAYA's learning agenda. This will take about 2 minutes. So we've got our first question, and our first question is, how difficult or easy is it for you and your colleagues to participate in this event? The options are very difficult, somewhat difficult, not applicable, somewhat easy, or very easy. And again, you're welcome to also put in the chat what ways might help your team participate in these events more readily. We experiment with time, we experiment with different tools and resources like AHA slides, but please do make suggestions, especially if it's somewhat difficult or very difficult for you to join. Thank you for your responses. We see those responses coming in. The second question is, oh, we've still got responses coming in, great. The second question is, what about this event should have been changed to make it easier to participate? So the options are date, day of the week, time of the webinar, technology that was used, language that was offered, the lack of accommodation for different abilities, such as hearing or sight challenge folks. Maybe this wasn't applicable to you or other. And again, you're welcome to type in the chat to give us that feedback. Day of the week, great. If there are other days of the week that work better for people, please do type it in the chat. We are constantly trying to adapt and make sure we get the most amount of people able to join webinars in this new virtual age. Oh, thank you all for your feedback. So we are at time. So I'd love for you all, we've got a link in the chat if you wanted to take 1 to 2 minutes to complete the survey that will ask for additional feedback on our learning agenda questions. Please do that. Again, this is your opportunity to feed into what Gaia is doing. We really appreciate your feedback, and we are constantly adapting to meet your needs. So please do put it in there. It is listened to. Thank you so much to our team and all of you for joining today. It has been a productive and fruitful conversation. We really appreciate your engagement. We look forward to sharing the survey result report with you, as well as the global dashboard. And we hope to continue conversations with you all over the next year and years to come. Have a great rest of your day, evening, and we hope to hear from you soon. Goodbye, everybody.